Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abby Cohen. I am the Assistant Director for Initiative Development and Processing with ODHE. We are happy that you have joined us for another Transfer Talk Tuesday webinar, and today we will be discussing resilience and transfer. Joining us this afternoon is Assistant Vice Provost Dr. Shanna Smith-Jaggers, who directs the Student Success Research Lab at The Ohio State University. Her research is primarily focused on instructional improvement initiatives, academic support programs, and patterns of student academic progression. Dr. Jaggers will be presenting for about 30 minutes, followed with a 15-minute Q&A. Please put any questions that you may have in the chat box, and we will circle back to those at the end of the presentation. A reminder to keep yourself muted, and this webinar is being recorded, and I will go ahead and hand this off to Dr. Jaggers.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. I'm going to share my screen here. So let's see, does this look okay to folks?
Yep,
Okay.
looks great.
Okay, great. All right, so today I'm going to talk about the role of resilience in transfer student success. And just a little bit about, I lead the Student Success Research Lab at The Ohio State University. And we do research on a lot of different topics, but transfer students are one of our favorite topics to do research on. But if you're interested in any of our other things, you can go to our website here at ssrl.osu.edu. So in terms of what we'll talk about today in the role of resilience and transfer student success, I'm going to walk you through two studies that really helped clarify this for us at Ohio State. The first is a study of GPA change, and the other is an interview study of our campus change transfer students. And so we'll talk about both of these and then some practical implications. So first, the GPA change study. So we did this analysis because advisors told us that most transfer and campus change students at the Columbus campus at Ohio State suffered a GPA drop when they came here. But nobody really knew if this was true or if it actually mattered to students' retention and graduation here. And if you look at the national research literature on the topic of GPA drop, a lot of it's really old, but basically it concludes that most transfer students nationwide do have a GPA drop, but there was a lot of disagreement about how steep that drop was. And we also saw in the research some suggestion that transfer student GPAs might rebound over time, and this was interesting to us. It was something that we hadn't heard from advisors here. So we wondered if this was true, and if so, whether it was important. So we did a quantitative study using administrative data at Ohio State. We were focusing on transfer or campus change students who first enrolled at Columbus campus anytime since 2012. And everyone that was in our analytic data set was on this campus for at least 2 terms so that we could look at whether they had a GPA drop or potential rebound. And after that, we followed them up to spring 2020 to see if they were still enrolled or if they'd graduated by that time. And the main outcome we were looking at was whether they had left the university without graduating by spring 2020, which we called departure. So that's what we're hoping to avoid. So as you can see, this did sort of extend through COVID. So just to note that COVID shouldn't really affect the results here because we excluded the students whose second term was the COVID term, where GPAs were just kind of nuts. And also the spring 20 enrollment snapshot was taken before COVID hit. And COVID didn't really negatively affect graduation that semester. In fact, it was sort of the opposite. A lot of students who might have otherwise stayed just went ahead and graduated that semester. So in terms of whether we saw GPA drops among the students in our analysis, we saw that most transfer and campus change students did see a GPA drop in their first term. There was an average drop of about 1/3 of a GPA point. And this 1/3 of a point was an average from a mix of students who experienced a drop and those who didn't. So about 63% of our transfer and campus change students did have a GPA drop in that first term. On an average, among those who dropped, that was a pretty steep drop of about 0.7 points. But then there were those that didn't drop, and on average, their GPA actually improved about 1/3 of a point. So when you average together those who had a GPA drop and those who didn't, you get that overall drop of about 1/3 of a point from 3.19 to 2.89. And in the second term, on average, there was still a drop, but it was much milder. And this is in part because fewer students experienced the drop, and those who did not drop as steeply. And also there were more students who actually improved their GPA in their second term. So among those who didn't have a GPA drop, their GPA on average did improve, and by nearly half a point. So a lot of students were seeing a rebound in their second term. So we wanted to see how initial GPA and this change across time affected whether students retained and graduated or departed before graduation. So this is a path analysis. It might look a little complicated at first, but there's really just 3 things to take away from it. The first is that students with higher incoming GPAs were less likely to depart without graduating, as we might expect. And then second, regardless of your incoming GPA, whether it was high or low, if you had a milder first term drop in your GPA, then you were less likely to depart without graduating. And then third, regardless of either of those, if you had a milder second term drop in GPA, especially if you had some kind of rebound, then you were less likely to depart the university. And I'll unpack each of these 3 findings in more detail in the next couple of slides. So first, in terms of incoming GPA, it was a significant predictor of departure, as you would expect. So if you came in with a GPA below 2.5, so that's between 2 and 2.5, you had about a 33% chance of departing before you graduated from Ohio State Columbus. But if you had a GPA higher than 2.5, then your chance of departure is halved. So this is, normal, what we would sort of expect based on academic preparation. But also critical was the extent of the student's initial GPA drop. So for the students who came in with a low GPA, and they're on the left-hand side of this chart, a drop of a half a point puts you into academic warning territory. So it's not surprising that we see high departure rates here on the far left. About 51% of the students who came in with a low GPA and had a steep first term drop did depart the university before graduating. But then if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, those are the high GPA students. They came in with higher GPAs, and even if they have a steep first term drop of over half a point, they'd still have a passing GPA. So there's really no academic reason for them to leave. But a steep drop in that first term can be taken as a signal that you don't belong here or that you can't handle it, and that psychologically that doesn't feel good to students. So students with an initial high GPA with a steep drop are about 2.5 times more likely to depart than those who did not suffer that steep drop. That was 27% versus 11%. So that first term drop is really important, but in addition to that, also important is whether the students rebounded in their second term. So this is just looking at the students who had a steep drop in their first term to see what happens to them. And the very far left bar is the incoming low GPA group. They had low GPAs to start with, and they had a steep drop. And then the gray bar on the far left, the 73%, are those that did not have any kind of a rebound. So by this point, they'd really be on academic probation. So a 73% departure rate is maybe not surprising. But if they were able to increase their GPA in the second term by even the slightest amount, so the amount we're looking at is 0.05 points. So just like basically just stabilizing and not dropping any further, and just getting a little bit better than they were the last semester, they were much less likely to depart the institution, 36% versus 73%. And then if you look at the right-hand side, these are the students who came in with the higher GPAs and had the first drop, a steep drop in their first term. That didn't feel too good to them. But if they were able to recover even that little bit in the second term, they were much less likely to eventually depart, 23% versus 32%. So all of this points to the idea that your resilience or your ability to bounce back from a difficult challenge really helps in terms of your ability to persist and keep going to graduation. So the key points from this GPA study are that incoming GPA matters, of course, but actually more important is whether you experience a steep drop in your first term, and if so, if you're able to bounce back and get back on track. So then the question is, how do we help students do that? And that's where the interview study is helpful. So we interviewed 65 prospective and recent community college and regional campus change and transfer students in 2019 and 2020. And most, but not all, of the community college students came from Ohio State. From Columbus State. So we asked them a lot of questions about their transfer goals and their processes and experiences. And here is a diagram of our key themes. This just kind of gives a high-level overview of the findings from the study. One of the main themes that we saw was the importance of what people call transfer self-efficacy, or feeling like you know what to do and that you can actually do it when it comes to being a transfer student. And self-efficacy in general is sort of highly bound up with the concept of resilience, although we don't explicitly list that in this particular figure. But the two things that really seemed to help with transfer self-efficacy were what we call transfer student capital, and then knowledge, which is knowledge about transfer, and then social capital or social support. So I'm going to unpack those two themes a little bit more in the next couple of slides. So first, transfer student capital. So this is knowledge about how to transfer. And as you'd expect, the extent of the formal institutional supports that were provided by the sending and the receiving campuses were really important here. So for example, this first student felt like they got lots of transfer student capital before they transferred. So they started at an open access regional campus, and they said the advisor said this campus were awesome. They left flyers around campus about transfer meetings. There's a meeting where they gave me an information packet. They told me what the process was like and what I should expect. But then the second student wished that they got more after they transferred to the Columbus campus. So they said, you know, when I got here, it was really confusing. Nobody's showing me around campus. I'm an adult. I could have done it myself. I did. But it seems like everyone's like, well, here you go. And I didn't really know where anything was or anything like that. Like a freshman who didn't get a freshman orientation. And actually, that quote, like a freshman who didn't get freshman orientation, was the title of the paper that we published on this study, because it was really kind of a theme that we heard from a lot of transfer and campus change students. And then social support is the social capital comes from the social support that you get from family and peers around the transfer process. So this contributes to knowledge about the process, and it also increases the motivation to transfer because you feel like you can actually do it. And so you can see that theme in both of these student responses. They both felt like they got lots of helpful social support around the transfer process. So like this student had a friend who had already transferred, and he said, this is how you do it. Here's A, B, C, D steps. So I kind of already knew this is what's going to happen next. And the other said, well, seeing how my friends went through it, they didn't have any issues. They're doing just fine. Look at them. They're out there. They're having a great deal of fun. They're involved. They're doing good in the classroom. That makes us feel so much more confident when we can look at them and say, okay, I can do this too. I hear all good things. It makes me feel confident. I know I'll have the same experience transitioning. So these students got a lot of sort of good motivation and support from friends who had already done it, but some students didn't have many sources of social support. We did see that finding social support seemed a little bit easier for our campus change students than it was for our community college students. Because for the campus change students, there are just more of them that are around the same age, they're on the same pathway, they're aiming for the same campus on a similar time frame. So for example, this first quote is from a campus change student who actually already had social connections from high school. So we played soccer together, and after high school, I went to regional campus, she went to main campus, and I knew if I was lost, I could call her. And she helped me out a lot, figuring out little things, like if I'm going to be late to office hours, I should email, stuff like that. But the second student is a transfer student who felt like they were really coming into campus pretty cold in their third year. So they said it was really hard for me to find study friends or go out of my way to talk to people that I didn't have my freshman and sophomore year within the dorms. I just didn't create those kinds of connections. I'm coming in as someone who's like some random person. It was really hard to talk to people, get to know people, develop study buddies, and like people to work with together. So that was the most difficult thing for me. So our interview study extended into the summer of 2020 when we switched from face-to-face interviews to Zoom. And we heard from a lot of students about the additional life challenges and the academic challenges that COVID had introduced. But in terms of the transfer process, we still heard those same themes about the importance of information and social support in helping students' self-efficacy and confidence. It's just that those themes were even more important in the challenging context of COVID. So that our key takeaways from the interview study are that students really need knowledge about the transfer process both before and after they transfer. And so that's including how to acclimate to the new campus and the new academic expectations. And also that social support networks are really important, more important than I think we necessarily expected. But a lot of times transfer students don't have good access to these social support networks. But if there are more students following the same path at the same time, it does make it easier to get both good information about that pathway from formal sources and also to make friends that provide that informal information and support and motivation, so that well-trodden pathway makes everything a little bit easier. So if we take the key points from these two studies and we combine them with the research literature on resilience, here's some ideas about factors that can help promote resilience more generally on the left side, and then the way that institutions can convert those into transfer practices, which is on the right side. So part of what's important about these practices is not just the behavior itself, but it's what the behavior conveys to students. And so those are the messages that I've put in parentheses. So for example, you'll be less likely to have a setback in the first place, or less likely to be negatively impacted by that setback and be able to bounce back if you understand what you're supposed to do and how you can do it. Understanding one's context and processes and tasks. So institutions can convert that into a transfer practice by making sure that they have clear and consistent and streamlined processes around transfer. But what's also important is not just that that system exists, but it's also that the message that that sends to transfer students is that transfer students matter to us. Transfer students matter enough that we actually built a system for you that works, and we're committed to helping you through that system. And similarly, practicing self-compassion is really important to building resilience. And we can help students understand how to practice self-compassion by showing them care and compassion and helping them to feel that indeed they are a worthy human who is worthy of them being compassionate to themselves. Being able to reframe difficulty as a wake-up call and a call to action and for improvement, rather than just a signal that you're a failure and you should leave, is super important to resilience. And we can help them do that through academic coaching and through tutors, that tutors not just providing information about how to do the task, but also about how to more broadly think about improving your performance. Like, you can do it, here's how you can do it. And then feeling belonging and connection is really important as a foundation for resilience. And we can help them feel more belonging and connection in a lot of ways, but one of those ways is creating more opportunities for peer networking and social support so that they have people that they feel part of a community with. So circling back to our GPA study, how can we help students build resilience against GPA drop and help them be more likely to rebound if they do suffer that drop? So first, both sending and receiving institutions should work to reduce the stigma and the shame around GPA drop and just normalize it. It's typical, but it's a temporary side effect of a transition to a new institution, any new institution. And so this can help students prepare for that possibility and be less likely to be shocked and distressed if it does happen, and also give them tools for like getting back on track. And then the second is that receiving institutions can pay special attention to incoming transfers who have GPAs below 2.5, because these are students that probably from the get-go need to be connected to tutoring or coaching in order to head off a potentially disastrous GPA drop. Because if you got a 2.5 GPA, if you suffer the typical GPA drop, you're getting really close to academic warning territory. And then third, receiving institutions can flag new transfer students that have a GPA drop that's greater than 0.5 point at the end of their first term and provide immediate outreach to those students before they start their second term. So one option that's available for our students in this situation is a 7-week spring academic recovery course. So it's specifically designed for students who had an academic setback in their first term. And so in addition to the usual study strategy and goal setting stuff that you would expect in sort of any like academic coaching kind of a course, It also focuses on mindset reframing and helping students build social support and connection. There's a lot of students that are there in the same boat. They all know that they're all there in the same boat, and so they can be a little bit more open with each other about what their challenges and their difficulties are. One of the things that we see with students who have academic difficulty in their first term is that they do have a lot of shame around it, and they don't feel comfortable sharing the fact that they're having a challenge with anybody. Especially high GPA students who are sort of coming in feeling like, you know, they really know what they're doing, and then suddenly they have a challenge to that self-concept. And it can be really hard for them to share that, not only with an advisor or faculty member, but also with family and friends. So being in a class where there's other students who are in the same boat can really help them sort of feel more self-compassion and realize, like, okay, I'm not unworthy just because this happened to me. There are other people in the same situation, and we can work through this together. Okay, so all of that, I got through it faster than I thought. I thought this was going to be longer than 30 minutes, so I maybe rushed it a little bit. But these are the key sources that I'm pulling from for this presentation, and these are all journal articles that are available, so that you can feel free to read in more detail. And then I want to also say, you know, all of you are also undergoing lots of challenges in the wake of COVID and in many other situations. And, you know, it's, I think, important for you to also be practicing self-compassion and resilience and giving a helping hand to others. So one of my favorite podcasts that I listened to during the COVID period, it was an economics podcast. So, you know, but they always signed off with this, take care of yourself. And if you can, someone else too. So that's my parting message to you, but we have plenty of time for questions, I think. So I'm going to stop sharing and find my big screen again, which is somewhere in here.
Go ahead and open up the chat, any direct messages that you have for Dr. Jaggers. You can put them on in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, totally up to you. Not have any questions right now. I do want to say thank you for all of this research that you presented to us. Do we have a question?
Oh, I was going to say a question that I often get from people is, how is this different? You know, we have regional campus change students, and then we had community college transfer students, and then in our big analysis, we also had four-year college transfer students. And how does all these kinds of things differ? And interestingly, what we found in the interview study was that the process of transitioning seemed easier for our campus change students, as I mentioned, but they did also have steeper GPA drops, which was kind of strange because we have exactly the same curriculum between our regional campuses and our Columbus campus. It's not like the academic expectations are different. So the GPA drop, we think, is, you know, part of just the transition to the whole new context. But even so, their transition is a little bit easier because, again, they have more friends that have made that same connection. But even though they were more likely to have a steep GPA drop in their first term, they were less likely to be affected by it. They were more likely to bounce back from it, and regardless, to persist and to graduate, because I think they felt more of the sense of belonging to the institution more broadly than the transfer students did. So anyway.
The good point that you made. I also think it's super important as a transfer student myself from Columbus State to Ohio State. The transition was a little difficult. So walking through this research, I can definitely understand where all the other transfer students are coming from. We do have a couple questions in the chat. Robin asked, who teaches the academic recovery course?
So they are coaches from our Dennis Learning Center. So they, you know, they are in their coaching life, They have one-on-one appointments with students to help them with goal setting and like steps to achieve their goals. And so they come in with that framework into teaching the course. So they're not academic faculty. They're more like advisors and coaches.
And then Jared asked, what advice do you have for other schools wanting to replicate this research?
I guess it depends on whether it's the qualitative research or the quantitative research. You know, the quantitative research is kind of challenging with a lot of the administrative data systems that many colleges have. So I don't know. I mean, interestingly, our GPA change study pretty strongly replicated what was already in the literature. You know, the literature was kind of dated, so we were like, do we believe this? Is this still true? But it pretty much held up. So I'm not necessarily sure that we need to replicate it again. But I think, you know, it might be good to just sort of take a look and look and see how many of your transfer students do have that 0.5 or more drop in their first term and what their retention and graduation outcomes are. Because if you see similar patterns there as we did here, then it might be a good idea to go ahead and start doing that kind of outreach right after the first term. Or if you find that you just, you know, you have much smaller drops and that you know, that even those who drop by 0.5 points like seemed to stay at your institution, then maybe there's nothing you need to do with that. In terms of the qualitative research, I think it's really just, I think it's more useful when you have like some specific areas that you're thinking about wanting to improve, and you can really talk to students about how they experience those areas.
Greg Gilbert suggests, or he said, I always tell my transfers that their learning process will be different, so prepare to adjust your learning methods. I think that's a very true statement also. Do we have, sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. And if you can give them some ideas or frameworks about like how to adjust, or have resources at the receiving institution that's about, you know, how to adjust your learning, like the academic recovery course, I think that's very important too.
This is Greg Gilbert. Thanks for reading my comment. But one thing I also try to do with the transfers, because going from 2-year school, which Owens where we're at, to a 4-year at that the natural progression, is that a lot of times they're going to be taking higher level courses anyways, which are going to be more difficult, and so try to prepare them for the drop, as opposed to all of a sudden it gets slapped in their face, realizing that you're going from 100, 200 level courses. You're also going to be taking 300, 400, could possibly be taking 300 and 400 courses, which are more rigor, more time, higher difficulty than what they've, regardless of what institution they came from, just because of the level of the courses. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, also, well, depending on the institution that they're transferring to and the level of courses that they're going to be taking, they might also be encountering larger class sizes and a more impersonal feeling to the environment. And they might feel sort of less comfortable reaching out. So I think reminding them that, yes, it will seem more impersonal, but the people there are still people, and they will be responsive to you if you reach out. It is, I think, also helpful.
You have a hand raised, and Perot, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Dr. Gyros, for your presentation. I just had a question about how you present this information to students. So I assume obviously you don't give them like a formal research presentation, but when I used to work at Ohio University and I would work with incoming transfer students, so we had a lot of supports sort of built into the system. Like there was a 1 credit like transition course specifically for transfer students that was optional. And it was always very difficult to convince transfer students that it would be beneficial to them, or also even when just planning their schedule for that first semester, a lot of them said like, oh, I can handle 20 credits, like I know how college works. And I would do my darndest basically to convince them like, well, keep in mind you're going to be adjusting to a new campus and things like that. It's just going to be like more than you're used to, right? So, and I never found sort of that like magic formula basically to convince them that like there will be some challenges even if you feel really confident. So I guess like have you found any tricks, I guess, to sort of market support systems and things like this to students who think that they've mastered college basically?
Well, I don't know if we have the solution, but the couple things that we have done or will be doing. So one is, in addition to the transfer student orientation, which every transfer student is supposed to go through, and most of them do, we moved it to online during COVID, and we've actually kept it online, but it has both synchronous and asynchronous components. And so some of those asynchronous components include, some of this general messaging, and then the synchronous is sort of more connecting with your advisor. And then we also offered a social event at the beginning of the semester that was specifically for transfer and campus change students. And the big draw was Brutus Buckeye. So, at Ohio State, that matters, having Brutus at your event. And free food. So we get really good attendance, and then a transfer student panel that sort of goes up and says like, okay, I'm a transfer student, this was my experience. And then we try to include somebody who has had, like, oh, I had some struggles my first year and or my first semester, this is what I did. So that seems helpful. So we're very decentralized. So our different colleges within the university have different policies about what people have to take. And so some of them have traditionally required some kind of transfer student intro course, and others haven't. But with the new general education curriculum, we have this bookends requirement. So all freshmen have to take sort of an intro course and then a capstone course that talks about like, what is the gen ed? Why do you take general education courses? How are you supposed to weave them together into an experience? So for transfer students, many of whom might have already completed, large portions of the gen ed, we've created a more customized version of the course that's just for transfer students, and it will be, I think maybe starting this year, required of them. And so that's also another opportunity to layer in some of those messages.
Great, thank you.
All right, do we have any more questions for Dr. Jaggers? Or Dr. Jaggers, do you have anything else that you would like to say to the group?
No, you can always, I can put my email in the chat. I should have put it in my PowerPoint and I didn't. So this is my email. So feel free to email me if you have any follow-up questions. Also to visit our website, and happy to talk to any of you at any time.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Jaggers. Again, if you have any questions for her, her email is in the chat box. We hope you enjoyed this topic, and we look forward to you joining us for our next session in May. And have a great day, everyone.